week of live broadcasting. So since we started, our goal has been right from the get-go to provide teachers with information and resources that will help them through this difficult time. We certainly hope you and your family are healthy and safe. And our Hot Tech Plus wants to send our best to all of you through these difficult times. Tonight, we're going to start off with our education team, and we're going to look at a question I think is very important, and that is how are we connecting with the students? So I'm going to have our team will start out with that question, and they're going to share with you how they're communicating with their students. And then we're going to bring on our guests. We have an outstanding lineup of guests tonight. We're really looking forward to their information they're going to provide. They're all from the university level. And, I'm sure they're going to provide us with some outstanding information about how they are coping with these times. So I'm going to start out with Chris and Brad and Brian, and they'll take care of those answering that. They'll share about their communication with students. Okay, Chris.
Great. Thank you, Rich. Once again, thanks so much for putting this together each week. This now being our 6th week, we could have never imagined it lasted this long, and we're happy to have the opportunity to do it, and we're greatly appreciative for all of our guests that have come on and agreed to come on. My name is Chris Meckelberg. Once again, I'm a physical education teacher, elementary K through 5 in Long Island, New York, and I've been teaching in my school for 10 years now. So as far as communicating with kids in this time, I know it's been very confusing for a lot of people. It's different for every district, almost every teacher in that district. I know it's different for every teacher in my district in particular, even across the phys ed staff. So it's been very confusing. In my district at the elementary level for kindergarten through 3rd grade, we're using an app called Seesaw. So right now as a physical education teacher, I've set up my own class in that app where it's a kindergarten phys ed, 1st grade phys ed, and so forth. And students through their parents' email have been able to add my class. And through the Seesaw, I believe it's called Schools Edition, that we just upgraded to, students can toggle between their classes within that application. So in that application, I've been just recently started videotaping myself, pretty much just inspirational messages, posting it to my wall where students can enter my class and see that I posted a video saying hello to them. Also, what we've been doing, this is also new to what we're doing here in the phys ed world in our district, and that is creating short mini lessons, mostly slides based, Google Slides based, and then narrating our voices through the instructions or any kind of content that is encompassed in those slides. And we've been narrating our voices through EduCreations. So we've been taking the Google Slides, transferring it over to that other application, adding our voices over to that, and then pasting that audio and visual link into our Seesaw accounts. So that's how elementary is dealing with K through 3. And our 4th and 5th grade students are fully Google Classrooms at this time and have been the entire time. So I've been communicating nonstop with them through that avenue as well. And now I'm beginning to post short inspirational hello videos to them on their walls. And soon I'll be starting what we're calling office hours, which will be 2 times a week for 45 minutes a session, where I open it up to one session targeting younger students, a second session targeting my older students. And those are just open conversations, pretty much for social emotional check-ins, where students can come in, see my face, I can see them, they can see their peers from their grade level and their grade level clusters. And we're able to just communicate, check in, see how everybody's doing. Also, we've had frequent communication with parents. I know when I first pushed out my Seesaw classroom, my phys ed classroom through Seesaw, I did a 300-person email chain letting my parents know how I'm going to go about adding the students to Seesaw, how they can add me, find me, and then how they can toggle between the homeroom teacher's class and my class, and then how I would post information and the videos that I would post. So really, since this has started about 7 or 8 weeks ago, the level of communication directly to parents has increased 1,000-fold. And then obviously not having that face-to-face connection with students is lost. So all of that time is gone. But the amount of student questions that are continually coming in and being answered on a daily basis is just getting higher and higher. So that's it on my end here. How are you guys doing, Brian and Brad?
Yeah, well, in regards to my district, like I've stated in the previous weeks, Monday is given off for teachers to plan, and it gives students a chance to get caught up with work. Typically with my district, the two most popular platforms would be A, Google Classroom, or B, Schoology. I'm not sure if Schoology is popular nationwide, but a lot of our teachers in the district are using Schoology, but I would say the majority of us are using Google Classroom. A lot of us feel it's just it's streamless to connect with the Google Drive. It's easy to create assignments, create a post or a question for students to interact with. So when it comes to the assignments, students could always type in the comments if they had a question. And one cool thing that I've learned is I have Cisco Jabber on my iPad. So the cool thing about that is you put that app on your iPad and you put in your office phone number in that app. So if any parent or student ever had a question, they could call you on your office number and your iPad will ring. So it's a great way to contact students and parents if they had questions. And obviously with Google Classroom, that's pretty easy to communicate as well.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. My name is Brian Hull. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm a teacher out in Denver, Colorado. I teach grades 6 through 12, so I get the best of both worlds in middle school and high school. And I'm humble and honored to say I'm the 2020 Shape America Central District High School Teacher of the Year. But in terms of virtual learning and how I'm communicating with students is, first and foremost, I have found that having a structured routine each week in terms of assignments has really helped me open up the doors of communication to my students. So a little bit about my routine is that on Mondays, so let me back up a little bit. Basically, my routine, the purpose of it is to set up a predictable environment for my students. So whatever day of the week it is, they're going to know what to expect when they log into Google Classroom, the platform I'm using, and what work they're going to need to complete. So on Mondays, if anyone out there is listening and does not know what Edpuzzle is, I highly suggest you look into Edpuzzle. Edpuzzle is a software that you can post any YouTube video online, and you can structure the video to where the video will randomly stop and pose a question that the teacher creates. And that's the assignments I give them on Monday is they have to watch a phys ed video and answer questions. Tuesdays, I've been doing some health modules, and I know Dr. Chad Killian's joining us tonight for the second time, but he and his team, along with Shannon Pennington, they created these 5 health modules, and I've been doing quizzes and reflection forums off of the health modules on Tuesdays. Wednesdays, I've been doing either a nutrition or health assignment, and then on Thursdays and Fridays, I'm having my students do mainly all physical activity, and they're picking a choice of workouts that they would like to do, and then their job is to answer some reflection questions at the end of the Google form. And then the last thing I want to say before my time is up is I'm really communicating with students through discussion boards on Google Classroom and then also through the use of Google Forms. So I've been really starting the last week or so. The students have to sign in for attendance on a Google Form, but also at the end, there's like some check-in questions. So students can really tell me how they're feeling, if they're stressed, if they want Mr. Hull to check in with them privately, and that gives me a pretty good gauge on who's doing well and who's not. And then last but not least, I also have a Google Voice number, which Denver Public Schools set up for all teachers in Denver. And it's a little bit what Brad mentioned, but each teacher was given a cell phone number through Google. And I'm texting and calling students through my Google Voice number on my cell phone. So instead of students knowing my cell phone number, all communications through my Google Voice number. So students are calling me and texting me, which is great. I'm getting to check in with students that way and being able to help them through their assignments I'm giving them.
That's actually a great option. I knew that was always a feature through Google to get that phone number and be able to have a phone call come through there.
It's awesome.
But really to have that in practice now in your district, I think that's invaluable. I think every district should be doing that for teachers.
Absolutely. I mean, we use the Google Suite anyway, so it's like, hey, just let's add on something else to the package.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, I know we wanted to talk a little bit more tonight and give a little example about maybe what our gymnasium looks like and some of the data that we were able to collect so far using the HeartTech Plus system. And really this applies to any heart rate monitors you might have, or pedometers or accelerometers, whatever data collection tool you have. How do we take those numbers, transfer them into something usable, and then apply that to our students, to our teaching scenario? And in this time where things are so uncertain, we don't know if we're going back in September. We don't know what social distancing guidelines will look like. Physical education has been talked about being pushed in the classroom, days of the week staggered for students in the school, out of the school. So what is phys ed going to look like? We don't know. But we hope that the majority of us listening and the majority of us out there have some sort of objective data that we could at least hold a standard to of when students were in our gymnasium, this is what they produced. Of course, our cognitive exams and our affective exams are fantastic, and hopefully we have those digitally too, because it seems like anything digital now has a greater standing in society if you can present those numbers in a nice format digitally. So anything we have as far as assessments go is important. But when it comes to really objective data tools and what you may have used with your students in the past and what those numbers can say about your program and really advocate for your program, I think that's now what we're in the most dire need of. Is we need to make sure that our programs are justifiable. You can't get rid of us. You can't get rid of the gymnasium. We need to still move. Humans are built to move. We need to have a level of movement within that day of play as well. So it can't just be staggered and recess all the time. It really needs to be structured with a physical education teacher. So that's a little bit what we wanted to touch on here in the beginning with the three of us. Guys, do you want to talk a little bit to that in your scenarios about how technology and objective data tools come into play?
Yeah. Brad, do you want to start or would you like me to?
No, I could start. Definitely from my experience, heart rate monitors are absolutely been a game changer for me personally, and I could attest that on any given day, if I don't have the heart rate monitors out, the students kind of like freak out and they want to know why. They definitely value the heart rate monitors. One of my biggest aha moments this past semester was when we were doing a basic walk and talk around the gym at the before class started, and a student approached me and said that she thought her heart rate monitor wasn't working because she was already in the yellow zone when she was walking. And that's when I sat the class down and informed them that walking could be one of the best moderate activities that they could do. And that just went to show me that students really need to be taught the basic examples when it comes to heart rate and objectivity, because most students think they have to be sprinting and go completely all out for them to get good exercise benefits. But when they have a heart rate monitor on, when they're just simply walking around the gym, they're able to see that they're at least working at the moderate level. And then that's when I can have your have basic teaching moments in there where teaching students that moderate more effectively helps burn fat throughout the body, whereas more vigorous helps burn more carbohydrates. And it's just naturally a good teaching tool. It's also great to show students the importance of resting heart rate and recovery heart rate. And both with this system, they're able to see resting and recovery heart rate as well. And ultimately, it helps students track their own data throughout class to see if those numbers are improving throughout the semester. So it's an absolute game changer. And most important benefit that I've been seeing is it naturally creates motivation for students. It gives them instantaneous data, which naturally wants them to move and come to class.
Yeah, I agree, Brad. I know you and I speak about this almost all day, every day, but I agree with everything you said and almost echo everything you said. I guess a little bit more that I can add on to is at the end of the day, I think this pandemic, in a way, is good for us because now's the time to see if students have taken our teaching and instruction to heart and to see if they've digested the information. So my whole goal is I use heart rate monitors every single day in my instruction. And the ultimate goal is I want my students to understand their bodies of what's going on based on what zone they're in. So if my students go to the park right now, they may not be able to afford a heart rate monitor or have one on. But the goal is they should be able to know if they're in the yellow zone, orange zone, or red zone, which I refer to as MVPA, moderate to vigorous physical activity. And they should at least be able to have a ballpark on what their heart rate is based on the colors they see when they're in my class in the gymnasium. And they should be able to know that if they're in zone 1 or 2, blue or green, they're not getting that many health benefits, whether it's cognitively or physically. So one of the main things I like the use of heart rate monitors for is the objective data, like Chris mentioned. So usually I like to teach my students at a heart rate of about 124 beats per minute. For middle school students and high school students, it's probably around the 60% of their maximum heart rate range. And like I said, if they're at the park or running around the block, they should know that they need to get their heart rate to around 124 to get into the fat burning zone, to get the most endorphins flowing in their brain, or to burn carbohydrates, like Brad said. But one thing I really wanted to mention in terms of objective data is the Shape America standards. And Shape America Standard 3, which states that the physically literate individual will demonstrate the knowledge and skills to achieve a health-enhancing level of fitness. There's an 8th grade level outcome that states, and I've got the book right in front of me, that says students should be able to define how the RPE scale, which stands for the rate of perceived exertion, can be used to adjust workout intensity during physical activity. So students should be able to understand when they need to tone it down, when they need to increase their intensity, and what the benefits of either scenario is. And again, the use of heart rate monitors and data does that for us.
Awesome. Thank you.
And real quick, along with what Brian said, there's several Shape America grade level outcomes that talk about students needing to get 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity a day. And with heart rate monitors, that's a complete game changer because it flat out lets them know if they're moving at the moderate to vigorous level. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say, Chris.
Yeah, Brad, and that outcome is a standard 3, outcome 6 for middle school for grade 8. Participates in moderate to vigorous aerobic and or muscle and bone strengthening physical activity for at least 60 minutes per day, 5 times a week. So this is objective data and standards based.
Awesome. I have a little bit put together for tonight just to show a little bit about my gym and some of the presentations we've done. And it gets going with a little bit more data, but data in a way that we use it here in the practical sense as a practitioner in the classroom with students, and how we can use kind of an action research approach to maybe collect some data. And my fear always is that we need to protect our profession. And unfortunately, in this day and age, the only way to protect that is by showing numbers and data. So ever since the revolution that was Naperville, Illinois, I always had the feeling that we need to use these numbers to our advantage and show what we actually can do in physical education. So I hope that that's really where data is coming from, is how can we prove what we're doing is positive for our students and we're having an impact on them when they come to our gym. So hopefully Rich will be able to help me share my screen. Beautiful. Okay. So just wanted to show some practical examples of how we can use the heart rate monitor data in a gymnasium setting. First thing, like we talked about a little bit, objective data. It's data that cannot be manipulated by the teacher or the user. The Hulls talked about putting numbers to the rate of perceived exertion and the RPE scale, and that aligns nicely with heart rate monitoring zoning. You can really use anything to get yourself some sort of objective measure, and the more accurate your objective measure, the more weight I believe it holds. So we have pedometers, accelerometers, and what we had been talking about, heart rate monitoring. It allows users and the teachers to gather and analyze the data for output metrics of activity. So what is that level of intensity of that activity? And where this way of educating, using this objective measure and this data tool, all this technology is, all any heart rate monitoring technology is just a tool. And if technology and that tool does not make your life easier, you should not be using it. So that's one of my guiding principles when it comes to technology, is it must make my life easier in order to implement it fully in what I do. So this is something that...
And Chris, if I could just throw one thing in, I think the use of heart rate monitors should be a tool, like you said, to help drive your instruction, and kind of almost like, oh man, I'm having a little brain fart, but it's like, it should be almost like PBL, to where students are getting their hands on real time to see what they can do with that data.
Exactly. And I think heart rate monitoring and any kind of objective data sharing to this extent really falls right in that PBL learning framework. And I know we were taught that extensively in graduate school, the PBL framework, and really leading with that end result and working backwards from there and focusing on all the avenues in from that one problem that you've identified. So when we use this, we're really just looking to focus on the effort and the engagement of students. We're not worried about their fitness level. We're not worried about how many laps they can complete or how fast they can do that. We're not worried about how many push-ups or pull-ups they can complete. It's how much effort are they giving us when they're with us, and how engaged in our lesson are they? And we're able to objectively measure that through the use of heart rate monitors. So I don't think... Yes.
So sorry, Chris, if I could chime in. And my favorite use of heart rate monitors is what you just said. There is no other content area in any school that can objectively measure effort like a physical educator can. If I'm teaching math and I see a student sitting in a desk trying to complete their problems on a worksheet, I don't know if they're trying their best. But a phys ed teacher certainly can do that with the objective tool that we have in heart rate monitors. So I absolutely love the effort piece and measuring that with heart rate monitors.
Like you said, it's unparalleled. We're the only ones that can do that. And when you go up in level of complexity from pedometer to accelerometer to heart rate monitor, now you're getting more ability to individualize that tool for a student now. So we've individualized it on our end and what we would need as far as data goes. But now with a heart rate monitor, you're able to actually individualize that monitor and metrics for that student. And of course, we have ways of getting their resting or ambient heart rate, and then we have ways of getting their max heart rate. And I do that through a number of standardized run, like the 20-meter shuttle run. So what is MVPA? We talked about that. And the Centers for Disease Control, who we're looking at now heavily, they just talk about it being over 50% of somebody's maximum heart rate. So that's relatively easy to achieve. And now we have some sort of guideline from a governing body that can point us in the right direction. And we know SHAPE says that 50% of our class time should be spent in that MVPA. So we're looking at the effort of student output, engagement of students during the lesson. And this is hopefully trying to produce a level of learning readiness after our class or after exercise or activity to a certain level or threshold, and academic and physical achievements through this level of exercise. So did you have data before COVID-19? That's the big question. How much data did you have as a physical educator? And what kind of data was that? Is it going to help you through this? Is it going to serve as a baseline for what you can implement in your district going forward with what might be lying ahead? So we have data on how students felt about your class. We know how to do that. We had data on student learning. We have cognitive exams. Hopefully, the more that were digitized before this event, the better you are right now. But do we have data on their engagement and effort? Do we have step data, distance, activity time, intensity of that activity? Do we have heart rate during that activity? Do we have their maximum heart rate? Do we have students' recovery time? Do we have their training zones? Do we have their MVPA time? If you could check a couple of those off that list, then you have a really good footing for yourself to say physical education is still important. And when students come into my gym, it's still important for them to be here and me to be face-to-face with them. So hopefully we can find a way to make that work after this time. Here's just two little examples. The first I'll play here is just my students in the gym taking part in the entire lesson design is based off Doug Hallberg and Tony Loomis's grid format, where it's pretty much just small-sided game and small courts. So I divide my gymnasium into 6 small courts, allowing a Tabata-style warm-up and then game flow progression through skills. So that's what you'll see here on the right. And you can see also we have the heart rate running up on the screen and see how the students are engaged through that. And this is how I would start most activities. And then depending on, no matter the unit, I would add those skills into each one of those grids. So we would work 90% of our lessons this way. Uh-oh. Hopefully that goes back. I want to play that video. All right. So you can see a good example there of how the gymnasium is coordinated off for students for maximal movement, small-sided games. And this is an example of a warm-up, students doing different warm-up skills, agility ladders throughout that time. And we're just monitoring the hearts on the wall. Students have been, educated on what the colors mean and what they should be looking for. And I strategically designed a lesson where you'll have one intense activity like an agility ladder, and that might be backed up by balance boards or something that's a little less intense to allow their heart to recover a little bit in between. And then this other video here is from a recent conference that we did. Rich was actually with us on this. So these are some fellow teachers out there. This would be more of like the unit itself lesson if this is the skills we were working on, and it being designed with a lot more equipment for actual skill development.
And I really like this because if you were actually in person right now during this video, you would be able to know which students you need to approach to maybe tone it up a little bit or tone it down.
Exactly. And as you can see, what's nice about that grid format, and that just goes into a little lesson design. So if you have MVPA in mind and you lead with the end in mind, then you know how you want to design your lesson and the flow to go through it. And by designing it in that way, you're easily able to rotate, change partners, change opponents, make courts bigger or smaller in a moment's notice. And it really keeps the movement and pace of the gym high which also allows those heart rates to stay high throughout the lesson. So those are some examples. And then this is like an example of a data right from that lesson. So this would be, this is that 1 day class. So that one lesson that you saw with the students and all the students in that class. And if I were to come up and select that class to look at that data, this is my overview that I would get here on the upper right of the screen. And you can see the average and the percent of time spent in the MVPA zone. So the system does a nice job putting all the data we would really want to see for educators right in front of us. Here's a nice bar graph charting out the different zones that students could be in and the total minutes from just that class that they participated in those zones. Next thing you'll see is an overview of the class. How many of the students met the class goal for the day of 50% MVPA? 75% of them met that. And then what's unique here about the system is that it gives you a little overview chart of the class flow. So you can see a student zone at any given time throughout the class. You can see how different students are in different zones at different times. So that's all a little unique feature of this system. And it just gives you a nice snapshot as a teacher to say, okay, did this student have an issue during this time here? It looked like he was maybe a little off task. He or she was a little off task at what they were doing. So this is just some features of the HeartTech web portal. So me as a teacher going in, I can easily pull up all this data from my students, from my class, for an individual student or a group of students. And you can pull that up for any kind of time frame you want. You can pull that data up for an entire year or longer or shorter, down to a trimester or a week or a day. So this is that same lesson, and here's 4 different student examples of how their heart responded during this lesson. And you can see there's a nice variety here, but there's a clear, distinct individual who had the most time in the MVPA zone, and that would be on the lower left, followed by the individual on the upper right. The one that's unique about the upper right is they really had a nice pace through the entire lesson for their heart rate curve there. So you can see the curve is above the bar graph that's going to tell you exactly how many minutes in each of the students' zone they were in. So this.
And Chris, can I add something?
Definitely, please.
Yeah, so the really cool thing about the graphs too is it's also good teaching moments for the students. If you call the student over and show them the graph, a good question is try to have them be able to articulate to you at what part of the lesson was at what point of the graph. So that way they could understand like when was the warm up, when was instruction, when was the main lesson focus, when was recovery, and so forth. So that way they could really also understand a lesson progression as well.
And if you think about taking these images and exporting them over to a Google Classroom and allowing the student to work with this data and work with these images, like you said, you could have them label that entire graph. You could even give them a word key if they can't remember exactly what we did for each part of the lesson. If there's a word key there and they were able to drag that over to a specific area, how correct were they at labeling the graph and recalling their level of intensity and exercise that they were performing by looking at their individualized heart rate curve. So I think the possibilities are really endless now that we're so digital.
Well, and I also like this because you can give a student their graph along with a random or along with another student's graph that they don't know who it is. And you can kind of compare the two and might say, okay, who do you think has a better recovery heart rate here at the end of class? What does a recovery heart rate mean? Why might this person have a better recovery heart rate? You could just do so many teaching moments. You can project one graph up to the whole entire class of, let's say, 60 students. Of course, you're going to make the graph anonymous, and then maybe you have a little class discussion as to how many minutes they think the student was in their target fitness zone based on the graph and so forth.
I mean, the capabilities into science, I know I used them this year at the middle school level, and the science teachers took the max and the ambient heart rate of students and then looked at 3 other points during the physical education class to graph those. And when they were able to see what the platform could do itself through the web portal, there was no comparison to the data the simple data that they needed in a science class at the high school level. The next thing we have here, just some examples of really the robust features of the web portal. You can build semester, trimester, or quarter grades reports. compile this data. You can see this here. This class report is for an entire month state range. There's 14 sessions in there. It gives you the averages. It gives you the total of minutes in each of the zones. So just presenting this to administration now or anybody would be supremely viable for you. Then the next thing we look at is this is actually one student over the course of 11 sessions. So for the trimester, this student, for example, they spent 62% of their time in MVPA, and that would be fantastic. This is what they did total minutes wise over all of their zones. So this is something I might even put into a report card or send this home exactly. Great job, awesome job on the semester as far as your effort and engagement grade goes. And then this is just a little bit about how each of this, if you look at the zones and the minutes in the zone, how it would equate in a Common Core curriculum, a Common Core assessment type criteria as far as 1 to 4 goes, and the percentiles that Common Core holds us towards, and then how the minutes in the zone based on, I have 40-minute classes and I give 5 minutes on and off for the heart rate monitors. So that's just kind of how I'm grading based on a 30-minute class and what they should be looking at as minutes in their zone. But this has all been established protocol now. It's taken me about 4 years to get to this point. So it does take some time to do all this, but it's really using and understanding the data and being able to know what to do after I actually collected it and how to present it to not only other administrators or colleagues of mine, but then back down to the students as well. So they really have that takeaway with it. That's the most important part for all of us with heart rate, is that students really have a strong takeaway and connection to what their biomechanics are and their biology is doing right inside their bodies.
Yeah, and Chris, if you don't mind me interjecting real quick, I think another really neat thing that I want to do, whether it's this upcoming year, the year after, is I would love to take, let's say, a date range report, kind of like what Chris has up here, let's say through the course of maybe 5 days. So Monday through Friday on a given week. And if the student had a high level of MVPA, kind of like this example Chris has up now, I would like to compare that and discuss with the students' teachers to see how behavior was and how academic performance was, because we all know the correlation between MVPA activity and academic performance and behavior reductions and the fidgety behaviors lessons and so forth. So I think that's another really neat and innovative way we could use heart rate objective data to kind of get other people on board on what we're doing.
Definitely, and I think that's a fantastic segue into our next guests that we have coming on, because any of those instruments and tools that we're talking about, really assessing students and how they're learning and what their thoughts and opinions are on things, now we have to have those digitized, and we have to be able to get those to students in a digital format and get the data back to teachers in an easy to read format. So with our next guest that we have on tonight, I'm so honored to have everybody that we have tonight. First, we have Dr. Jaimie McMullen that's going to join us in a couple minutes. And Jaimie has just been named to the board of directors for Shape America. Hi, Jaimie, how are you? Thank you for joining us tonight. Just up on the screen there in the middle, that's Shannon Pennington, has done fantastic work with Chad Killian, who's also on with us tonight. And we also have Dan Gawrisch returning with us, who's one of my 5-star members. So first of all, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time out here. I don't know how much of the information you caught up leading up till now, but don't worry about anything that was spoken about before. The floor is now yours to really give us a little more insight about the higher ed level, how you have been dealing with these times. And I know specifically for the guests that are new, talk about yourself, introduce yourself, and let us know really some of your visions for physical education and what drives you. We'll start with Jaimie. Thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Yeah, thanks. Good to see you all. And I'm Jaimie McMullen. I teach at the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, Colorado. I'm an associate professor in our physical education and physical activity leadership program. So I teach undergrad students, graduate students at the master's level, and I have PhD students that I work with as well. So interesting times for all of us, I think, right now as we navigate, these I hate to keep using the word unprecedented, but these unprecedented times. And, I think I'm interested to talk to everyone else and see how they're doing with the shift. And we've been able to have some great conversations, I think, as a higher education community. And Chad might be able to talk a little bit more about that too. And so I'm just excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. Chad, welcome back. We'll give you the floor now. Introduce yourself. Anything latest and greatest in your world?
Hey, good to be with you guys. I'm real excited. I want to get to the point where I can be officially called a friend of this show because I love what you guys are doing so much. I'm Chad Killian, Dr. Killian, I guess my students call me, but I'm at Georgia State University. I'm in the kinesiology and health department there, and I teach in the HPE program sector. And my lab specifically deals with studying the use of digital instruction within the physical education environment, particularly the remote digital instruction or online instruction. I work with undergrads, master students, as well as supervise some doc students. We have a lot of fun down in Atlanta.
Awesome. Dan, welcome next.
Thanks for having us on again, Chris. Good to see everyone. Anytime you can sit down and talk physical education with a bunch of people who are passionate about physical education, I think is something I really enjoy doing. As you know, my name is Dan Gawrisch. I am a doctorate student at the University of Illinois, studying physical education pedagogy. And I also am a faculty member at Martin Luther College, which is a college for teachers in New Ulm, Minnesota. So I work as an instructor at that teachers college, working in the physical education, teacher education department. And then I'm also working on my doctorate. So thanks for having us on.
Thank you. And Shannon, I know you've been a listener to the show and you participated in the chats. Thank you for that up until now. It's so great to have you on, and introduce yourself.
Sure. I kind of keep a foot in each door. I'm a doc student, and I'm also, I think of myself as a teacher. 20 years in my school district in the suburbs outside of Chicago, with teaching high school for 14 years. I taught K through 6 for a year. I've been the middle school physical education instructional coach. And for 4 years, my role was teacher leader outside the classroom for our district's mentor program. And I decided that it'd be a good idea to start a PhD. And so I'm at the University of Illinois in Urbana, Illinois. And my research focus is on trauma. And I hooked up with Chad and Dan as doc students as Chad was finishing up, and started working on different projects with them as well. And I'm excited to be here because I think it's really cool that teachers from everywhere can connect with other teachers and really start to connect with people who are doing really good stuff. So thanks.
Well, I think the trauma's on high now, so you should be able to get some good studies from this. Well, Jaimie, I want to go to you next. Congratulations again on the board appointment. I really just want to know a little bit more about that position. What made you want to go for it? A little bit more about your background, how you came to have this passion for serving others in our community, and really where you hope it to go.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for the congratulations. It's really an honor, I think, as an elected position to think that people believe that I'll do a good job at it. So I think that that's really nice. And I've been serving the profession for about 20 years, since I was an undergraduate student at the University of Hawaii. I had a professor there, Dr. Julie Maeda, who really encouraged us to get involved. And I believe my first thing that I did was I presented with her at our state AFERD convention, and I really felt the value for the professional organization at the time, and have stayed involved with state and district and the national organization in various ways over the last 20 years. And so I really just felt like this was the right time for me, particularly because I think we're at a really important, I don't want to say crossroads as a profession, but I think there's a lot that we can be doing as a profession that we might not be doing as good or as well as we should. And I'm really excited about Shape America's commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, which are things that I find hold very important to me in my own teaching. and I think should be very important for all of us as physical educators and health educators. So that was really the impetus for me to run for a position on the board of directors. And yeah, I mean, I have my, we have to do orientation. And so I have that next week, and I'll learn a little bit more about my role, but really just wanting to be a voice for the members of Shape America. And I feel like I'm quite accessible, and, you know, people can reach out and give me ideas, and I can hopefully, like I said, serve the profession in a meaningful way through my role on the board of directors. And if you hear my dog barking in the background, I'm very sorry about that. It's her 13th birthday tomorrow. So.
Oh, happy birthday.
Yeah.
And also not a problem. So now just throwing a question out to everybody a little bit more. Maybe I'll start with Chad and we could trickle out from there. How did that meeting go yesterday? What were some major topics maybe? What were some major hangups? And just what were some takeaways that you can share down with the public school and the elementary ed people that are listening?
Yeah, we actually had it this afternoon. It was call number 2. And so was about a month ago, we had a call and there was about 170 people, give or take. This round, our second call, we had about 130. So there's still some pretty good interest. And like I mentioned last time, I mean, it was such a positive thing to see people from all over the country come together and find support in each other's stories and experiences. In some ways, we're all sort of experiencing similar challenges personally and professionally, but in many ways they're very different. So hearing other people's perspectives and experiences and solutions is really helpful for me, especially as a young faculty. And so I think in some ways the calls are still kind of forming. It's still beginning in the iteration. So we're kind of figuring out what might be the best way to approach them. But I think from a community standpoint, they have a lot of value, and a lot of that's practical. I mean, I think we've hit on some issues that a lot of people could sort of gain from. And as I think what we'll see now is some decentralization with smaller groups sort of meeting and talking about specific issues that might be relevant to a smaller group of people, which I'm all for. I think, you know, we're past the point where we need to rely on an organization to call a conference and everybody travel to the same place. We can sort of, I envision a future where if you have an issue, throw it up on social media, get 4 or 5, 25 people together and have a conversation about it. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I think there's value to having sort of a large group, national, international call. But I think the real value might come eventually from just the realization that we don't have to wait to see each other at Shape America. We don't have to wait till ARA. We don't have to wait till, the state AFERD conferences. We can just call up some friends or call a call out on social media and solve some problems in the immediate. I don't know, Jaimie, what do you think? Or Dan, I think you were there too. What do you guys think?
After sitting in on it today, I mean, Jaimie and Chad were part of the organizing group to put it on and host the event. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to do so. For me, it was just phenomenal to see all the faces and names from across the country and around the world, really, of people who have been researching or passionate about physical education, teacher education for a long time, and making a big impact in our profession, which trickles down certainly to the K through 12 programs. One thing that stood out to me was how we started the meeting today, which I think is a direct relation to K through 12 instructors as well, in that we also are continuing to survey, engage our students' needs and find out where they are at, because this is a challenge for them, just like it's a challenge for us. And that's something that I think continued to come up as a priority, as it should. So I think we have a lot in common with K through 12 educators in that regard. The other thing that stood out to me was what Chad mentioned, the sense of community, in that elementary and high school teachers and middle school teachers seem to be sharing content, ideas, resources through social media, share docs very well, and they have been for a number of years now. And that snowball is growing, and we want to get one going with more momentum in higher ed as well, so that we can continue to build on each other's ideas and share ideas, not just at conferences. I think there's something very good about sharing those in person and meeting in person, but also to be able to do that online or without having to leave your office and have immediate responses or whatever else. And the third thing that stood out to me was, again, something that I think has come up for K through 12 is that when and if eventually we do get back to face-to-face instruction, we are hoping for and hoping to capitalize on a renewed interest and passion for health and physical education. When college students, in-service teachers, ourselves, faculty members, parents, K through 12 students, everyone will have a renewed, hopefully, interest in health and physical education and physical activity. And we, anticipate there may be an uptick in mental health, anxiety, understandably so. And so, we are more critical now than ever before, but we have to capitalize on that with quality content and quality education. So that's what I soaked in today. I didn't really participate, but I was just very, I think, blessed to be able to sit in on that meeting. So.
Yeah, I think I'd pick up on the collaboration piece, and that was really, Chad, you might have talked about this last time you were on, but it was a small group of, there's 7 of us that kind of came together after seeing the PHE Canada group come together in a similar format. And there was really, I think the cool thing about it was that there was really no agenda. It was really just, let's come together as a community and collaborate. And yes, we came together kind of under crisis, but I think that as we've seen from the amount of people who have participated, there's a need for our community to come together and collaborate. What I also think is really interesting is, I was looking through the participant list, and there's a lot of different people on there with different philosophical orientations about physical education and even physical education, teacher education. Yet, as Chad mentioned, we're all facing this very similar challenge at the moment. And so maybe we can kind of fix some of the fractures in the profession by coming together in this way. The other piece that I would say that I think is really important is that while we do come together specifically as higher education faculty at conferences, we're typically there to discuss our research, and most of the conventions or conferences that we go to, if not all, are primarily focused on dissemination of research. And that doesn't necessarily have a big bearing on our practice in higher education. A lot of the research that we do is relevant to maybe changing practices in K through 12 or the community, but not necessarily what we're doing in our own pedagogy. And so I think it's been really interesting to kind of have these discussions around how things are impacting our own pedagogy in higher education. And I really see this filling a really nice space around coming together to connect about our teaching and our students and our profession versus just our research, which is what we typically do. So I think that that's going to be a really positive benefit coming out of this series and whatever it turns into.
I want to change gears just a little bit, talking a little bit more in the trauma lines. We know what this is going to have an impact once we go back to face-to-face. And when you talk about the K through 12 spectrum, it's already been talked about by the CDC that we have to maintain social distancing. That's what is going to impact this restart of all these schools again, is how can we maintain this? They've talked about, obviously, face coverings and hand coverings for everybody. What kind of trauma is that going to put on the students, the situation, the coming back to schools? They've talked possibly about staggered days or staggered years, A-B schedules. Students would be half the time remote, half the time in person. All of these super huge changes to the educational system as a whole. And then phys ed on top of that has all of that interaction. So they've already stated to stay out of those congregating areas where students will mix and all of those types of things. Same for the auditorium or anywhere else people would congregate in a school. So with all this being said, how are we as phys ed going to advocate for ourselves to not only stay relevant, stay in the schools, and stay in the gymnasiums? I mean, that is going to be our next real task. Maybe I'll start with Shannon. Any thoughts on this new world we may be entering?
Yeah, that there are question marks all over the place, and it's really hard to try to picture what that's going to look like. I think physical education has quite a few things going for it, and one of those is that we have multiple goals and multiple opportunities to learn. And the way the social interaction and affective type learning looks is probably going to have to look a lot different. But one of the things that we know about trauma, anxiety, depression is that physical activity mediates that. It serves as sort of a buffer for a lot of those chemicals that are happening in our brains. I think one thing that teachers can probably start to do is think about recognizing a kid's inability to sort of regulate all of this uncertainty. And teachers need to take an opportunity to look at how they're going to do that for themselves as well. There is sort of a secondary trauma that teachers experience when they're around all of these emotions all day. So I think maybe just starting to educate ourselves a little bit more about what the impact of trauma looks like in terms of behaviors, and how what we do in physical education can serve to help kids regulate themselves are two biggies that we're already positioned to do. We're in a place where all of us are learning a lot about a lot of different things because we're home and we're just scrambling to find resources. There are good resources out there on trauma and kids and teachers and classrooms. There's not a lot, though, on trauma and physical education. And so that's part of what my research is trying to figure out is what can physical educators do to help kids who are experiencing trauma and also start to recognize the symptoms. But we need to be able to take care of ourselves as well.
Anybody else want to add in on what the future could possibly look like with all these new recommendations or standards in place, or what their states are talking about for reopenings?
Yeah, I might jump in. I think the challenging part, as from the higher education standpoint, is considering how our students are going to get their field experience hours and student teaching hours and things like that, because everything I'm hearing, it's very unlikely that student teachers or people that are outside of the school will actually be allowed into the school to do those things. And so obviously I think the climate around this is changing every day, and so who knows what the future holds. But that's one thing I know that we've been talking about as a higher ed community is how can we meaningfully replace some of those practicum experiences and student teaching experiences. The other piece, and this is the trauma piece too, is that, our college students are experiencing real trauma. And so, most of them did not sign up to be taking classes online right now. Some of them are good at it, some of them are not. And some of them are extremely overwhelmed. We had one undergrad student who just stopped engaging in all of his classes, and I'm his advisor. So I called him on the phone and he was very shocked to hear from me. And I said, "What's going on?" And he just said, "I'm just getting so many emails. I just shut down. I couldn't handle it." And while that might not be easy for most of us to understand, that's a reality of something that's happening, because who knows if he has a family member who's sick or, something else. And so we're so used to, I think, as teachers at all levels being there for our students and putting all this energy forward, yet we're all experiencing our own traumas as well associated with this global pandemic. And so I think that there's a lot that's still so unknown that it's hard to make predictions about what this is all going to look like. And I don't know about all of you, but even as restrictions start to get eased, I'm hesitant to even go out and go start doing these things because, it's almost trapped, like we've become sort of trapped in this fear, which I think is healthy in some ways because we should be afraid, I think on some levels. But yeah, so I think at the college level, that's the piece that we're struggling with, and the trauma for our students of not being able to actually fulfill their degree in the way that they imagined. So we have graduating seniors graduating next year. They will be graduating next year when we hold an actual.
Feels like it.
Yeah, but they'll be supposed to be graduating next week, which isn't happening. And those students were mid-student teaching when this happened, and for them, like for some of them, it was like the districts cut them out completely because of FERPA things and whatnot. They couldn't have access to the online portals and whatnot. Others, were actively helping their cooperating teachers like develop really great content. And so this isn't the way they imagined finishing. And so I think there's so much going on right now, like for all of us, that like it's important to think about the content, but it's also, I think, a really nice time for us to highlight what we do as a profession with respect to social emotional learning, and all of those pieces that come with our subject outside of the physical piece, which was talked about a little bit today, actually, in our Pete call.
And I think that's what's really important to keep in mind is we've all just been thrust into this situation. So it's new for everybody. Everybody's putting their coping skills into overdrive, into their unique scenarios and life circumstances. So that's going to trickle down at every level. So we need to keep that at the forefront. And I think a big piece, just going back to what Dan had said, is surveying the students. You guys probably do a better job at that at the collegiate level of talking with your students or surveying them. But I think that's probably where many districts drop the ball on how to best roll out this remote learning procedures and really finding the balance between too much work through the digital platform and not enough work. We haven't really communicated with our students, probably from a district administration level as a whole, to really know what they can handle and what their parents could handle from an at-home standpoint. So I think we got to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, and you all talked about before we came on about being action researchers with the heart rate monitors. I think a lot of that, that sort of approach in this context could be valuable as well. Part of that is asking your students, part of it is hearing what their parents are saying, part of it is sort of assessing the value of what we have to offer in this context and sort of piecing it all together to develop the right approach for this time for your students. And that looks different everywhere, obviously, because students are different, contexts are different, accessibility is different, programming is different, whatever. But I like the idea of action research, especially now, and especially because there's not an evidence base about effective practice related to online teaching. So we really need teachers, and we ourselves as university professors need to be action researchers. This is a real-time experiment going on if you distill it to the sort of, objective pedagogical approach. And a lot of that could involve gaining empathy that we might have lost through dealing with a lot of difficult students, a lot of years. So I see the optimism in this is like we can empathize more with our students because they were caught off guard. They were fearful in a lot of the same ways that we were caught off guard and fearful. And so the action research as a stepping stone towards a more empathetic and humane approach, I think, is one of the good things that could come out of this.
I think now is the time too. We have the most time to really get information that we might want from our students at a public school level, the K through 12 level, because we could send a friendly survey to them and get really their feelings and feedbacks back. And maybe is that one way we advocate for ourselves to stay a subject and in the gymnasium in the future is we actually surveyed students while they were home and they loved coming to the gymnasium more than they liked doing at-home activities. Because, how can we best advocate for ourselves or set ourselves up to be advocated for into the near future when these big decisions are going to be made by these states and whatnot.
I think that's a really good point. And, we talked earlier about how, in our view, PE and health may be more important than ever before. And we hope others see that as well. Well, that's not going to happen if we don't follow through with quality teaching on the back end and advocacy as well, because just like there's a lot on our plates and students' plates, there's also a lot on administrator plates and policymakers' plates, and they are not necessarily thinking of the physical education program in your district or at your university, unless you are going out and intentionalizing it for them. One thing I think we have to be careful of, though, too, is that, K through 12 students and higher ed students all have a lot of different classes and teachers and instructors going on right now, too. So we have to be careful of, over serving as well and over digitizing them. But it would be very interesting to find out how parents feel about how active their kids are with sitting in front of a screen each day and how much they value physical activity. Well, now let's translate that to the school setting and think about them sitting in a desk all day, just like they did for you at home, and how challenging that may have been, because we know they need physical activity to perform at full capacity.
And I think that's just one issue right now, is where we might have students' attention maybe more frequently, or at least in a position to get us back some data digitally. I think the parents are so overwhelmed with everything, including their own workload on top of it all, where now is not the time to necessarily survey the parents. We need to survey the students and their attitudes, and then we can parlay that in normal times, hopefully through our advocacy during this time, to maybe some positive thoughts from the parents about needing to be in school and in the gymnasium and participating in physical education. I don't know, but that seems to be the trend from our parents here, is it's just an overwhelming time for them in particular.
Can I jump in there, Chris? I think one thing that is so important, and I keep bringing it up in every kind of forum that I'm in, but this idea around equity, and how I think that this whole situation has really highlighted the lack of equity in a lot of ways in education, and that we really need to think about for ourselves too, even just making sure that we're being equity minded with what we're planning. And so even little things that I see teachers putting out, and I know that they have the best intentions of doing it, but scavenger hunts or bingo things, and it's like, go ride your bike. And it's like, well, what about the percentage of students of yours that don't have a bike, or that live in places where they can't ride a bike, and so they can't fulfill that requirement? And I think we just need to be really equity minded right now, and understand that even from the standpoint of family participation at home, family means a lot of different things to our students. And so just being really aware of those pieces as health and physical educators right now, I think is super important.
And equity now doesn't just mean you have Wi-Fi. I mean, there's so many other challenges at home with how many kids need to use a single device. Maybe what is that device? I know my wife, being a New York City teacher, has students participating in her Google Classroom just through a parent's cell phone. So their ability to interact on that platform is limited even more just through that device, and that's all they have. So that's another big hurdle for students and people at home at this time. Just a couple more questions we had before we close up for tonight. Was there anyone or anything that you guys had talked about that maybe we could start doing in the K through 12? Maybe Chad, I know you and Shannon had worked on some resources. I don't know if you wanted to screen share any of those at this point, or just elaborate a little bit more on what each of those modules are and how they would fit into a teacher that would be home now.
Yeah, so we, back in early March, when this sort of started becoming apparent that there might be widespread school closures, I wasn't very active on social media, but, keep an eye on the Twitters. I started seeing a bunch of resources kind of come out, and the quality was, not the best. And, at that point it was to fill a gap. And so, what can you expect during that time? But as a week went by, this is our research. This is my research area. So I'm like, well, how can I take, thanks, Brian. I want to hear about what your students think then. We got to talk sometime. But, we wanted to provide a rapid response to help teachers quickly and give them some assurance that there was some quality involved in it. I've tried to make the point that it's based on a lot of the pilot data that we've collected, a lot of unpublished data. It's stuff that I've been thinking about, which not a whole lot of other people have sort of taken a research approach to. So we applied our knowledge to create these modules in a way that can provide a rapid assistance to teachers, but also invite them into the content. So we structured them with a recorded voiceover that Shelby Eisen, an ODOC student in Illinois, did. It's a package video that you can watch on YouTube, but we also included the slides that didn't have a voiceover and that were able to be edited if they downloaded them. So the idea in our teacher support videos, which we also provided for each module, was to encourage teachers to tweak the content, to tweak the information, and to actually give it a shot and record your voiceover to invite them into the design process. So it was a multi-layer approach, and I put a graphic out on Twitter. It's just sort of my idea of what design and PEAT should be, is we can have an impact, a rapid impact now through designing curricula or designing modules or designing content as researchers and distributing rapidly through social media. There's a ton of people out there right now typing away, writing their grants, ready to study this, and we'll get the results in 3 years and no one will be helped in the meantime. So we're taking a 21st century approach, putting a halt on some of the immediate scholarship and providing a direct service to teachers right now, which in our hearts is kind of what we wanted to do during this time. So we're pretty excited about it. The content's a little bit different. It's a lot of what we learned at the University of Illinois about sort of the exercise psychology, physiology, sociology. But sort of the next step is how can they be expanded? And if teachers want to do that, I think there's opportunities to do that, to sort of extend through beyond 5 weeks with design features. And we're kind of thinking about the best way to do that. But this project served a lot of purposes. Number one, to help teachers immediately, which ultimately helps students immediately. But I said the last time, I hate technology. So it was an opportunity for me, I think Shannon and Shelby, to learn some of these design things and feel what it's like to develop this stuff, to understand the process as well. So it sort of had this ecological impact from designers to PEAT students that could see it on social media, to PEAT educators who never thought about online PE really, and see what, we're modeling it in a way. But ultimately it gets up to teachers and down to students, and that's the impact that we want to make.
Yeah, we were trying to just sort of strike a balance between a skeleton that could go out and be useful in and of itself, but also be able to, for teachers to expand upon it and use it to make sense in their own context. So if you don't want to do anything with it, you think the 5 weeks are fine, then send them out there. But for me too, when I see resources, I always think, yeah, but I think that I might say this in a different way, or I want to bring in some other type of assessment. Everything was editable so that it gave teachers a jumping off point. And you could build on it if you wanted to. But Chad had made the point too, that we were seeing so much stuff being thrown out there and everybody just sort of in a panic trying to give their kids content. We needed teachers to be able to take a breath and sort of think about, how am I going to continue learning? And we were just trying to take a breath with teachers and say, let's buy you 5 weeks. We're going to put this out there. And then I'd be really interested to see where it goes from here. How have teachers been using these modules, building on them? How have you modified them? What's the feedback you're getting from students? And then if we should have to do something online in the fall by not going back, do you have now a little bit of professional development and practice with some of these platforms that will make that process a little bit easier?
And those are all curiosities that we have and we talk a lot about in our weekly meeting. But we were also very intentional not to make this a research project. We don't want to research this. We want to help the teachers right now. And the research will come. But at this point, it was because there's other things too. Like a lot of corporations are putting out real expensive modules because they have the power and behind it, and they have, the flair and all of that. And we wanted it to be free. We wanted it to be designed by teachers. I mean, combined, we had 25, 30 years of teaching between the three of us. And so it was designed by teachers who think about this from a research as well as a practical standpoint. And it's free, and it will always be free, and will never not be free. And we won't ask you about it. this one. We won't ask about this one. So there was a lot to it. It's an iteration, man. Like, it's the first step. We did it. It took us a while. I mean, it was work, but it was a fun process to think together as a team. It was a fun thing to know that we're helping students. It's fun to see the design pieces, and I want more people to do this as people, because you learn so much by tinkering, by designing, by disseminating, we all talk, like, let me button my shirt, like I have a PhD and I really need to just, talk like this. It's like, we're thinkers, man. Like, get your ideas out there. Let's talk about it. Let's get a little bit messy. I mean, be professional, be intentional about what we say, but like, we can debate, we can have a little bit of friction. We can throw something out there before it looks really pretty behind that 4-year peer review. It's like, I don't know. I'm a new guy, so what do I know? But it's like,
Chad, do you foresee this also possibly like supplementing content in the future once we're back to in-person classes? I know you've done some work with flipped learning potential, and could this be something that also could be used to add to the content already delivered, maybe in a flipped learning type setting, maybe in an online setting, maybe in-person setting?
Yeah, I mean, 1,000%. It's content that we wanted to portray the value of physical activity from a psychological, a physical, a social, a lifespan perspective. And so, yeah, we're doing it as an online sort of rapid transition, but we didn't really, I don't even know if we said COVID once. I don't think we did, really. It's like, we designed it to demonstrate the value, and the assessments and the invitations to physical activity were such that students could decide how to do it on their own and reflect on the content. So it could very easily be used as a supplemental sort of online module. None of the videos are more than 10 minutes long, maybe 12 minutes long. And then you could bring that in and have a class discussion during, a regular face-to-face, or keep it in the back pocket if things do close down again. Use it in an extended school closure the next time it happens. I mean, there's literally zero quality evidence to suggest that online modalities work, but there's also zero evidence to say that it doesn't work. And so we need to have an open mind about this. And if we care about quality physical education, we need to care about quality online physical education, because it's not going away. That's my little soapbox, but it's not going away. And so
I'll jump in. I appreciate so much you guys are doing that. And I think one thing that this has highlighted is that as physical educators, we have a lot of work to do with respect to advocacy, and there's a space to fill. You can find 100 million fitness videos, physical activity, general videos. But one thing we're finding in Pete is when you go online and search for physical education lessons, like in videos, they don't exist. And so this space, this virtual space, is something that I think, unfortunately, if you want to look at it this way, has been filled by fitness based activities, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But they don't always relate to the standards and outcomes that we think are important in physical education. And I'm actually working with a group of folks, Colin Webster and Brian Culp and a couple other people, higher ed folks, around, we're calling it tentatively right now, virtual spaces, family and community engagement. Essentially going to be looking at ways that we can have more kind of family and community friendly physical education resources in a virtual space. And so, Chad, it might be nice for us to connect with your group and see what's happening there, to kind of move that forward. And to pick up on the earlier point about it coming from teachers, that's a huge part of what we're trying to develop as well, is this idea of, if you watch a yoga video and it's, Jesse from Peloton or whatever it is, like the connection maybe isn't there, but if it's like your physical education teacher leading this and talking about it, then, or even someone like, like from a school that might be recognizable to you. I've heard of PE teachers who, they have kids from other schools joining in their live, PE lessons and things like that, just because they want to be there. And so I think there's so many options right now, and I think we've discovered kind of a space that we don't fill very well as a field, with looking at availability of virtual resources. And so it's great that folks are working on that, and I think it's something that will be really valuable for the field.
It's a little bit sad that it took a global pandemic to push the conversation into that space, but I think it's better now than 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think in general, physical educators were always kind of scared of online PE, and I think done poorly, there's reason to be afraid. But this is forcing us to sort of rethink what we're doing. And I think when you look at it as the glass is half full, we are poised to make a positive difference in the profession. And our hand may have been forced, but there's a lot of really good stuff happening out there, and teachers who are really pushing their thinking about what quality PE looks like. And so, let's take this situation and run with it and make it ours and make it work for us, instead of being afraid of what might happen to PE. We have an opportunity to make it really amazing.
And this could actually be an opportunity where we're looking at social distancing in a gymnasium, and I think the first thing we have to do is advocate for it to stay there. But then once it stays there, class sizes of 15 or 20 students might be the dream for some people. 25, 30-minute sessions with 15 students at a time all day long, that might be better than most people's teaching scenarios now. So it might not all be gloom and doom for us, but we need to make sure we have advocated ourselves into a position where it's not, okay, we can cut PE because now we can't be together in one area. We need PE because it's even better now than it's always been. So we need to be ready for that too.
I think, can I just add one thing to that? I think the one piece, and as far as I understand the CDC guidance document, they're recommending that the physical education teacher goes to the classroom. And honestly, I think from a public health perspective, like right now, that's probably the best option, rather than having kids coming and going from a space. So I do think that we need to be conscious of like what's best from a public health standpoint to make sure that people are healthy. The other piece that keeps coming to my mind, and is this idea of like, teachers are going to be going back to school buildings with some level of fear as well, and like what teachers are going to be comfortable with, and particularly for administrators to have those discussions with the teachers in their buildings, like what are you going to be comfortable with when we all come back to school. And so I think the dream scenario, right? Yeah, we're back in the gym with the kids, and things are the same. But I don't think that that's looking realistic right now. And so I think we just need to keep in mind teachers' feelings about all of those options as well, in general, as we go back.
Well, we could be the ones being put in the most hazardous situations, having to go to every scenario in every room in the class, in the school building throughout the day. So now you could be looking at a hazardous situation more than ever for a so special teacher that's traveling around now. And, what does the middle school, high school look like now? We don't have students changing classrooms. We have teachers changing classrooms. What does the PPE protocol call for? Of course, all those questions are just up in the air. And it's going to be even harder to have phys ed in the classrooms than it ever was, especially if there's now still the same amount of kids in that classroom of 30 or more.
And maybe that creates an opportunity to deliver content that we haven't had a chance to deliver or didn't really want to, because it might involve kids sitting. We want to have that highly active PE environment in the gym, but we can draw them in perhaps with the cognitive, affective, reflective conversations and push them out, so to speak, with suggestions about how you might apply that in your home space or in your neighborhood space with the appropriate precautions. So as somebody who likes to think creatively and maybe to a fault, I think it could be an interesting thing if we can get behind sort of the fear of the immediate, you know what I mean? Because we came to this point being pushed into an online learning. We're going to be pushed into the new year into having teach in a classroom, and it just creates the same response, only in a different context. So my hope is that administration at least can give teachers some idea of what it's going to look like, so that we can have, maybe we could have a few calls over the summer about, you're teaching PE in a gym in 3rd grade. That looks a lot different. Or PE in a classroom in 3rd grade. That's a hard thing to do with a bunch of 3rd graders.
You got to almost deliver the content in the classroom and prescribe the activity at a home setting. And then that would be, what does home allow in different scenarios?
But we're seeing these little networks pop up on social media. I think there'll be time for them to grow over the summer. And if we can leverage those and be willing to sort of throw ideas out there that might not be perfectly refined, this could be an opportunity to help each other out.
Definitely.
If we want to be optimistic about it.
Well, anybody else want to add anything before we close the evening? And I just want to thank everybody again for coming on and sharing all of your expertise with us. I know it's greatly appreciated by everybody.
Thanks for having us.
It's always
fun.
Thank
you so much. Thanks so much. I'll ask Rich to take you off and bring back the team. Next week, we're going into live episode number 7 of the series. We're going to be joined by a company called Platform Fitness. And I know Jaimie just talked a little bit about how the fitness industry has really maybe overtaken the physical educators in a way of producing and delivering content. We want to make sure that the physical educators are still at the forefront. Me knowing Platform, and I'll let the Hulls talk a little bit more about Platform because they know that team a little bit better than I do. But when I did meet them, they were very physical education conscious. They had been working on their product to deliver physical education teachers, delivering that PE content through their platform. And I don't know where they stand today, so I'm eager to learn next week as well. But I'll let Brian and Brad talk a little bit more about next week's guests.
Yeah, so Chris, like you mentioned, it's going to be the company Platform. They're based out east, but they started out really for like the health and fitness industry, but they're really starting to go down the physical education avenues as well. They've always had a podcast, but now they're starting to have PE teachers on as guests on their podcast, which I've been on twice. It's awesome. It's very professional. But yeah, I think next week they're going to really be talking about some of the resources they've created for this pandemic, and they have a very good fitness and weightlifting curriculum that teachers can follow at home with their students. And they also offer a very good package for when we do go back to school. So I haven't used it personally, but the teachers I do know who have used it, they have nothing but good things to say about Platform and the resources created.
And I know it's a robust video library of, form specific activities. And then that's coupled with a really robust data storage software aspect where you can really, store numerous amounts of data for every student and really analyze how a student's progressing. So, that's going to be very interesting to hear a little bit about next week. Anything else, guys, tonight before we wrap up?
Oh, that's it. It was a great episode. Thanks again to Rich for facilitating this. Chris, you moderated this great, and it was again great to catch up with everybody.
Yep, thanks everyone.
And good luck to you guys this time next week. We hope that you are Shape America Teachers of the Year, and we will have our fingers crossed until then. I think we're actually going to move next week's broadcast to Wednesday night to get our guest on a night early to relieve the Hulls here and allow them to celebrate with their families, hopefully. So we'll keep everybody posted on that. And thanks again, Rich and the Heart Tech team for tonight. I don't know if Rich is there.